Hello,
Are we
everyone.
live?
Yes, we are.
Cool, cool. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy Sidefacts. I am the founder and president of From the Block to the Boardroom LLC, and we are super excited to have this panel discussion, cannabis clergy and the community, to talk about all the things, the benefits, the educational opportunities, all those things that we can benefit from the plant here today. This is a partnership between Curly from the Block to the Boardroom and the Be Noble Grant. If anyone don't know the story of Bernard Noble, um, locked up, sentenced to 13 years, spent almost 7 years in prison for what amounted to 2 joints of marijuana. But this whole initiative now is to be able to from those proceeds bring these opportunities here to the community on education. I believe it was in October when we did the cannabis and cancer event, talking about the medical benefits of cannabis to folks who need it. So this is a great opportunity once again to have this conversation with the clergy. We have some very dynamic speakers on this afternoon. So I'm super excited to have this conversation. Super excited to bring it to the community. Super excited to work with Marijuana Matters, John Belly, Reverend Boyer, and all the guests, Reverend Taylor and Reverend Armstrong, on this conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney. And Courtney, you can take it away. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I think my name is Courtney Davis, and I'm the executive director for Marijuana Matters. I'm excited to be here for this conversation with Mr. John Bailey, who I believe is going to give an overview of the panel and introduce what we're going to be discussing today.
Okay, hey, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. Good to see you. And thank you for the opportunity to share and to engage. Today we're dealing with some of the what I would call inspirational and aspirational speakers from around the country as well as in the city of Trenton. And with us, the Reverend John Taylor from Friendship Baptist Church, Reverend Darrell Armstrong from Shiloh Baptist Church, and Reverend Charles Boyer from the Greater Mount Zion AME Baptist Church in the city of Trenton. And so, what we're going to do here today is to get some perspective, some insights. I'm not sure how deep a dive we can get into in the amount of time that we have, but we will be able to get to some very important and good questions and some feedback from some very thoughtful individuals, as well as those of you who are in the listening audience who may have questions that you may want to pose to us during the course of this time. From the civil rights movement to criminal justice reform, the faith community has always been at the forefront of social justice issues in America. During this panel, you will hear from leaders in the faith community about the criminalization of cannabis and the intersection of health and economic development the legal cannabis industry presents to communities of color. We've been doing, Courtney and her own, each one of the presenters, myself, we've been doing these types of conversations all over the country. And so, as Tracy said, we're excited about being able to hold today's conversation, especially during Black History Month. Now, some folks are going to spend time saying 2, 3, 23. That's Michael Jordan's number. But today, it's the Black community's number. And we're going to be looking at the types of things that are going to be important as we go about trying to make sure that this particular plant has the benefits, and then we can see the potential of all those things that are going on in our community, for our community, with our community, and in many cases against our community. And so this should be a great conversation. So with that, we can start right off. Now, we all believe that the faith community has a role to play in the cannabis legalization, whether it's focused on the reentry community, community building, opioid treatment, workforce development, or health and wellness. Uh, you know, let's start off with the Reverend Armstrong. Where you get a chance to get on as of yet? And okay, then he hasn't joined us yet, and so we'll just go straight to Pastor Boyer. Pastor Boyer, in your opinion, what role can the faith community best play in the conversation around cannabis legalization and restorative justice? And I'll ask that question to you and then also to Pastor Taylor.
Oh, well, thank you, John, Tracy, Courtney, all the folks from Marijuana Matters. Appreciate being part of this discussion. Um, you know, 12 years ago, when I started advocating around this issue, folks, particularly in the faith community, thought I was out of my mind. I was dubbed as a drug dealer peddling drugs to our children. I was cussed out in my church by another faith leader. All kinds of things going on. What I can say is that I think all this time later, with all of the information that has come out, it has definitely shifted the conversation, particularly when it 1,000% comes down to racial justice. The fact that Black folks didn't use or sell cannabis at higher rates than white folks, yet and still the majority of the folks being incarcerated, the majority of the folks being stigmatized, the majority of the folks being divested from and catching charges and catching hell were Black people. Now turn that around, all of a sudden various states decide that, you know, there's more money to be made by legalizing than criminalizing, much to do with so much of the advocacy work from advocates and bringing down more restrictions upon these places. So they decide that there's more money to be made in legalizing than criminalizing. And then that entire market and that entire thrust is made to benefit mostly white males at the point that it was a major. So they're pouring billions of dollars and allowing white males to make billions of dollars after they have literally made so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of poor Black felons. And so the role for the faith community is to shout loud from the rooftop about that egregious injustice. And that's really the role, you know, that I feel that I've been called to, more so to make sure that justice is done. I'm in no way a business owner. I'm not even a partaker, none of that. But what I do see is that wherever injustice is that clergy should be speaking out about it. And the last piece that I would add, particularly as the state and the federal government has been the major perpetrator of crafting laws and these injustices and the racial disgusting history around marijuana laws and why they were ever made in the first place, why cannabis was ever made illegal in the first place, was all around controlling Black bodies. And so the major piece for faith leaders in my mind is fighting for reparations around this issue. And so if there's tax revenue to be made, it sure enough ought not be going back to the states or eventually the federal government. It should be coming back to the very communities in which they harmed through prohibition in the first place.
You know, Reverend Taylor, this is your buddy. You and I have talked many times, and you tell me, I mean, using the vernacular of from the boardroom to the streets. This is one of your boys. All right. He's a faith leader. He has come to the city and he has brought a different perspective. Yet you've been in the city for a while and you've raised these types of issues. You've talked about the fact that many of the folks who are coming back to Trenton and back to urban centers have been incarcerated or have been given a red badge of courage. And we should be trying to find ways to get them and engage them and get them back into community life. What's your take on the role of the faith community can best play in this conversation?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think Reverend Boyer kind of hit on it with the educational piece, the health piece, making sure that also that our communities that were impacted, Black and brown bodies, and especially our African-American brothers and sisters that have filled up these cells over the years. And now that there's an opportunity to reinvest, that money needs to be redirected and reinvested in the communities that took the hit. And so it's a controversy. Well, alcohol was controversy too. And we know that our government always find a way to make money, because they made plenty of money off of us for 400 years, 250 some years plus with free labor. So the argument is, and I know it comes from so many, including myself, that felt a little uneasy about it. But if there's economical power and the opportunity to reinvest in our people, in our communities, then we need to take advantage of it. We do know with everything else there have to be tests and various things that are done to see what the outcome, long-term, short-term is. But short-term, long-term, when they did the tests and investigations on the early part, they made sure we went to jail, while others would come in our communities, buy the drugs, and ride out, cross bridges and everywhere else. And Pookie and Ray Ray on the corner always got caught. So, and it costs more money to incarcerate us, $100,000 plus to incarcerate one person. And when we can take this revenue and educate, build, instruct, make sure we get the proper health care, make sure we get decent schools and businesses and homes. There's so many dilapidated homes in the urban area. We can take this money and reinvest it, move our people from renting to ownership, and empower them. So I'm pushing it. I'm on board with it. It's here. We'll take some flack for it, but it costs to be out front. They told me a long time ago, if you can't take the heat, get out the kitchen. It's time to start cooking. So.
Is Reverend Armstrong on? I think.
You're on mute, JB.
No, I'm here. I was saying, Courtney, do you have Reverend Armstrong will probably get with us shortly. But Courtney, do you have questions for the two pastors?
Yes, I did. Reverend Boyer, I really loved what you said about wherever injustice is, the clergy should be there. That really stuck with me. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about your organization, Salvation and Social Justice, why you decided to lean into these issues, why you decided to talk about cannabis reform, and a little bit about what your organization does.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So Salvation and Social Justice is a Black faith-rooted public policy organization. And so what we do here in the state of New Jersey is that we really lean into the power of Black faith. Black faith has been the cornerstone of Black liberation. There would be no Black liberation in the United States without the Black faith community. The Black church is born out of the liberation struggle for Black people. So everything from the Free African Society to emancipation to Reconstruction, when a flood of Black elected officials came in, most of whom were actually clergy folks. Even in the Civil War, it was the Black clergy that was recruiting Black folks into the war to fight for our freedom, all the way to civil rights. And so even in the modern day, we see it critical to come from a Black faith perspective to advocate over all issues involving the liberation of Black people. Today's and as we know, that slavery was never abolished in the United States. It just moved from the plantation to the prisons. The prisons get packed through egregious drug policies, through ridiculous sentencing, all of these pieces, but particularly to the prohibition issue, whether it's cannabis or crack versus cocaine, whatever it is, the entire usage of laws, particularly around substances, have been racialized and used as a means and a method to incarcerate Black people. So we lean in, particularly there, in places that clergy and the church has been uncomfortable to lean in. Because one, people get more comfortable when you lay out the arguments and let people know the history that's behind all of these things. Second, the church should always be leaning in from a place of compassion, care, restoration, redemption, rather than police, prisons, punitive measures, and retribution. And so whether it's cannabis or whether it's substances, to criminalize things and to bring more harm upon Black people, which is all that these things do, doesn't make any sense. But we advocate for restorative measures, for health approaches, and to deconstruct the laws that disproportionately impact us.
You know, Reverend Taylor, how do you think, just knowing the background that this stigmatization of cannabis has had in the Black community, and especially in churches? I mean, Pastor Boyer mentioned it, and you mentioned it a little bit about folks who just didn't see the relationship. But how do we, from your perspective, how do we introduce this topic to community leaders and congregations in such a way that it contributes to the destigmatization of the plant?
Well, I think that's all thing: information, education, having focal groups to discuss and talk about it from all age groups, not just the youth, because most of us that are middle-aged now may have had some participation along the way in the things that kept you mellow and yellow. Y'all not talking, and brown and fine. But some have never crossed that line, and they have only been exposed to some of the information and some of the education around this particular plant. But we know from the history, the native Indians and all the way up to our current time, people used it for medical purposes and other reasons along the way. But once again, when it's time for this situation to change, and now it's become lucrative, the same communities and the same policies and laws that was put in place to incarcerate us now, these same laws and policies will allow cannabis to come and be profitable in our communities, and we'll wind up on the short end fighting it because we don't have the proper insight and education and information that we need to make sure our people are empowered. It is here. It's not coming. It's legal, whether or not it's medical or recreational. So we need to make sure that our communities, we have suffered the most, so we should benefit from it the most. Not leftovers, but be a part of the partnerships and the percentages that would make a great impact in our communities.
You know, this is going to be what it already is, a multi-billion-dollar industry. In several years, they're talking about $50 billion worldwide. You know, is it, Charles, from your perspective, has the war on drugs put us in a position that our folks in the church have been able to deal with the no conversation, just say no, because the folks who have been talking to us have put us in a position that if we didn't say no, the opportunity that we may be incarcerated was very real. What is your position on how we go about contributing to the stigmatization and the education necessary relative to the plant?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll answer from a couple of levels. One, it's important that faith communities know that cannabis and drugs as a whole have always been legal in white communities. So regardless of what the books say, white folks get to do whatever they want with impunity. Just like Pastor Taylor said, you know, they can come in and out of Black community. They are not the ones being shuffled in prisons at crazy rates. They sell. They've done all of this at even higher rates. The more illicit the substance, the more it skews towards white folks than Black folks, just to be very clear. And yet, and still, we are the ones disproportionate. So that alone should say, and then we all remember what happened when the opioid crisis first hit, because when it first started, and it was mostly a white problem, there was a white compassionate approach to how that was being dealt with. And so just for us to be very clear, within faith communities, compassion and care has always been the first means when it's white folks. And so at some point, we need to be compassionate and caring and prioritizing people rather than punitive measures amongst our own folks. I think we can see what the white man's theology and what the white man's ideology does to us is best demonstrated in what happened with Tyree Nichols and what we all witnessed. And that's what we tend to do in faith communities when we beat our brothers and sisters over the head with hardcore taboo-ridden items that just hurt people more than help people. The other piece of this that we also need to understand that, just like you alluded to, these things are kind of fed to us. So we were the ones hardcore on law and order, right? All of these pieces we feed right into the narrative in order that at the same time, they can make sure that we're not participating in the money grab that's going on. And so as this huge, gigantic, multi-billion-dollar industry is emerging, it's critical that within faith communities, folks are understanding very much biblical texts like the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous. Very much that what do y'all think they was trading in the Bible when it was spices and the incense burning and all that? What do you think all these things were? This is not new. Marijuana did not just pop up in the last 60 years. These kind of medicinal plants, these herbs and these things that these things are even present within the biblical text, but we don't talk about it that way. We tend to over spiritualize what's in the Bible so much that it becomes practically irrelevant. And so to really work with our communities so that folks really understand, see things very clearly from both theological, political, and sociological lenses will go a long way, so that we don't get further traumatized and further oppressed by now also not being able to reap the benefits of the financial pieces that come out as a result of this emerging industry.
You know, Pastor Armstrong, you just joined us, but the question was, how do we introduce a topic to the faith community and your congregations in such a way that it contributes to the destigmatization of the plant? One of the things that I see you doing, and I think that this is really something that all of us should, number one, should take the theme, but number two, should be making this happen around the country. And that's the program that you do with having a seat at the table. Because I think that that's a very meritable piece, because the two pastors before you talked about we need to be engaged, we need to do something. And I think your seat at the table concept suggests that not only should we be talking about it, but we should be having a seat at the table. And if we don't, pull up a lawn chair. So from your perspective, what do you see as a way of being able to help, how the church can help destigmatize the whole conversation around the plant?
Well, let me apologize first for coming in tardy. I had a little technical difficulty, obviously. It's good to see my brother colleagues, Boyer and Taylor. God bless you all. And certainly want to thank you, John and Courtney and Tracy, for putting this forum together. Wanda James, whose name probably has already been mentioned, if not needs to be mentioned, as one of the first Black proprietors in this arena, has a seat at the table. And I learned a long time ago in competitive sports that you got to be in it to win it. If you're not at the table, then you forfeit the right to be able to input your voice and your perspective into the conversation, whether you're for or against anything. You've got to be able to articulate your perspective in a way that allows folk to hear you without being turned off. And I would think that clergy, of all people, had practice figuring out how to convey our message in a way that allows people to hear us before they tune us out. And so I have made it my business in the pandemic to bring information and inspiration to our viewers and listeners to say, listen, be slow to speak, quick to listen, and slow to judge, right? All biblical principles. Now, I know we have a strong perspective on this issue, and some folk are strongly for and strongly against. But they said that about interracial marriage. They said that about, as Pastor Taylor said, about prohibition in the 1920s. They said a lot of things along the way. And when we are quick to speak and slow to listen, we do forfeit the opportunity um, to learn. And so I'm grateful. I'm planning a child welfare conference in Denver, helping to plan one in Denver, John, as you know. And I've had a lot of my colleagues say, Pastor, how can you even talk about child welfare and cannabis in the same breath? You who are a proponent of child abuse prevention are now going to speak about and bring together at the table individuals who would suggest that that which was illegal just a year ago, 2 years ago, now, and children were removed from custody because of it. You now are proposing that we can have a conversation. Um, and so I said, absolutely yes, because we have to understand all aspects of this particular reality. Pastor Boyer does an awesome job of talking about the historical aspects of how, in our native indigenous communities, something that was intentionally a part of their psycho-spiritual development and growth became illegalized and immoralized. And I would declare that when capitalism is at the table, we have to always be mindful. But at the same time, um, we know that there are medicinal benefits, and we have the ability to talk about it in ways that benefits so the community. So we have to educate, and I think our job as community leaders is about education.
Sounds like the peace pipe to me. Courtney, do you want to engage us here?
Yes, absolutely. This has been such a great dialogue so far, but I think one of the recurring themes here that I've heard is like this is not going away. This is something that is happening. It's not a if, it's a when with medical and adult use, and so it's being seen as an opportunity. It's something that's very popular. Recent polling has shown that there's an overwhelming amount of support among voters for adult or medical use. It's bipartisan, and we mentioned earlier that there are a lot of historic ties between between politics and Black churches. Elected officials are often invited to stop by Sunday service to speak to congregations. Churches have served as polling locations and have even endorsed presidential candidates. And so, how can the church continue to use their political leverage to shape a very popular topic, such as cannabis reform policy?
Why don't we start with Reverend Taylor on this one?
Well, now on that piece there, I have mixed emotions because I believe that right now, clergy needs to take the forefront to make sure that we educate and empower our people on this topic, communication, whether or not it's negative or positive. And then later on, we can do the political mumble jumble thing here because, it was the political people that said just say no after they dumped all the drugs in our community, then circle back around, locked us up because they knew in the urban areas that you would be near a park, a playground, a school, or something when we start hollering about the various things that went on in society, which they produced in our neighborhood. So this time, I believe the clergy, we should do our homework, study on both sides, get all of the information, because on the negative end over there, they said that marijuana, cannabis leads to other things. There are other studies to say that's not true. So we need to study both sides of it, inform our congregates and everyone we come in contact with, the community as a whole, inform them, give them both sides of the narrative, use our community colleges and other spaces, some of our spaces at our places of worship, whether that's the temple, the mosque, in our case, the churches. We got plenty of space that we need to educate and empower, then bring our politicians in, because depending on what side of it is that you're on, whether or not you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, I think the people trust us, and we're not one and done. We just don't come through at a certain season. We have to face our people every week. And on this particular subject, I think we need to make sure we're in the forefront of it because it's a very lucrative situation when you're talking about billions of dollars. But we also want to make sure that our young people, middle age, and those in their golden years have the proper information they can study and dialogue because it's here. When here in this state, um, the governor wanted to pass it, we knocked it down. Then we said put it on the ballot. It went on the ballot, and it passed. And now, while we are sitting here talking today, other people are making millions of dollars.
So so Reverend Taylor, let's pick up on that, Courtney. Excuse me. Let's pick up on that because the point is political leverage. As you know, in every legal state, in almost legal states, and even in New Jersey, everything goes to the legislature, and so there's a political impact from Scutari, president of the Senate, or Laughlin, president of the Assembly, and even the governor's office. And so, with everything being so political, and the fact that in 1 year, 2 years, they're going to come back to the legislature for reform. They're going to look at the amount of money that went to municipalities impacted by the war on drugs, the amount of money that's going to public safety to make sure that the officers in the state can know how to recognize when somebody is under the influence. So the political piece is really a big piece. And I think that they always have to march hand in hand. I think you were sort of saying that, but you put the political piece back a little bit. And what I found out is that those who are driving the focus are the political people, but those who are propping the political people up are the lobbyists. The legislators really don't know. The lobbyists are the ones that are giving them the information, telling them what they need to do, what they need to vote on, and also contributing to their campaigns if they decide to run for re-election. And so, can you take another moment just on what I just shared with you to talk about that political piece?
So that's why it's very important, because if we don't educate our people and know what to have the lobbyists and the various politicians to fight for, we have to educate them to know what to ask for. Because if not, then the politicians will be telling you what you need or what's coming to your community, where the community needs to have the proper education and inform people on what we need. For too long, people have been telling us what we need in our community, and they set up programs and do various things. And then when it comes in, it's not what the community needs. So if we empower the community, then we have educated voters to know what to ask for. Like I say all the time, I don't need no politician come kiss no babies. I can kiss my own babies. I need to make sure we have the right policies there so that child can eat, have a proper education, have their own business or work for someone, and then they can reinvest in their community. But first, we need to be an informed voter. For too long, we have voted based upon how we feel and not based upon being an educated voter. And then I believe the community and the politicians and the spiritual leaders can be at the table, as Dr. Armstrong just said, at the table, not at the barbershop, but at the table, making sure that we empower our people and the revenue resources come to our community that's needed. Because when you can ride up and down a city that's 7.5 miles, depending on who you talk to, and on every block, every city, abandoned housings, when our public school system and private or charter have to struggle for resources to educate our babies, then we have to beg somebody for health care in the richest country in the world. And here we are in one of the richest states in these United States of America. Something's wrong with that picture for too long. And we have the opportunity right now to change that. And so we have to take advantage of this situation now to make sure that our communities are well educated, but empowered. Because as I said, as we speak in this area, as we speak, Hopewell, Lawrence, Ewing, and other townships are benefiting from cannabis, and Trenton is still lacking.
Okay. Reverend Armstrong, how about your thoughts on how the church can continue to use their political leverage to shape the cannabis reform policy?
Well, all politics are local, John. We know that. And so when we talk about the 13 municipalities in Mercer County, we talk about the 21 counties in the state of New Jersey, it's all local. You take any given topic and it is localized, influenced by culture, influenced by religion, influenced by race, influenced by region. And so it's often been said that folk get the government that they vote for, or that they deserve. I have mixed reactions about that statement because it seems to overlook systemic issues, systemic racism, systemic um, structural issues. But if we do not participate, if we do not vote, if the registered voters who are registered don't come out to vote, then I can certainly understand the conclusion that folk will devalue one's input and opinion if you lack political potency. And so, one of the challenges that we have in the city of Trenton that my colleagues know all too well, and Reverend Taylor touched on it, is that we have a city of 80 plus thousand people. You have 40,000 people who are registered. Less than 10,000 people vote. And so when we see other municipalities taking action, it is because localized, organized people have put their foot forward and declared what they want and what they don't want. Churches have long since been the arm, an extended political arm of influence, because it is organized people, it is organized money. Tyree Nichols' funeral was held at one of the most famous houses of worship in America. Um, it was in that place that Dr. King gave one of his most famous speeches, understanding that until you organize people, whether it is a bus boycott in Montgomery or sanitation workers in Memphis, the church, and I would also extend houses of worship. Elijah Muhammad has taught us the power of the Black religious institution. Malcolm X taught us the power of the Black religious institution. And so we understand the power of Black religious institutions, but in America particularly, it has been the church. And so I continue to say that people of faith and organized houses of religion and their denominations must speak up and speak out, not just on this issue, John, but on so many other issues where we need to bring out the voters who are at least registered, let alone getting more people registered to vote.
So, picking up on the political piece, Reverend Boyer, cannabis has been used as a tool of oppression, weighing the damage that has been done to underfunded communities of color. How can the faith community help these communities redefine their relationships with cannabis?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I kind of pick up a little bit on the last question too. You know, some history here in New Jersey. Um, you know, I was crying from the mountaintop for churches to get involved in this issue for years, saying to them, it doesn't matter how you feel about it, it's about to be legal. It will be legal. And if you don't push, we will get left out. And we will just have a whole nother type of oppression on top of what they've already done to us. When it went to the ballot, which we did not want it to go to the ballot because we knew it would be hard to negotiate social justice items if the white folks got a yes just to legalizing marijuana. If they just had a clean go legalize it, we would have no leverage to make sure that all of the social impact things would be in there. Fast forward to what they did once they got a yes vote. On the weekend of the insurrection, they introduced a 200-page bill and tried to slide it under the door. And it had absolutely nothing in that bill for Black people. I thank God that even though, the church in New Jersey really wasn't involved, the Black church wasn't really involved on the issue at all. But I praise God that the congregation of those who've been beat down by police, locked up, dealing with I praise God that church was ready to be the amen corner. And we shut the legislature down 4 times because we said it was going to be a white boy money grab that they were trying to do after years of oppressing Black people. So there was a whole lot of energy amongst directly impacted people, and we were able to shut the legislature down 4 times. They added in a social equity excise tax on the weight, and they put in 70% of the tax revenue coming back to the impact zones, the places most impacted. And so I say all that to say that is so critical in regards to redefining. Right now, we got cannabis corporations coming into our various communities. We got people that need jobs. Pookie and Ray Ray that were locked up for it, they need to be employed by these people. We still have folks in the legacy market right now because the legacy market still does exist. And what we've done now, the same way that the state as a whole, when they legalized, they took the numbers off the street and they called it the lotto. We took away an economy from poor Black people. And we've done the same thing with cannabis. So now we have to ensure that those who were in the legacy market are getting jobs. We got to make sure that there's pathway into the industry from business. We got to be there to make sure that we're breaking down the barriers for pathways to be owners. We got to make sure that the political pieces are in place so that those who have records, especially on cannabis, that those things can't even be considered when it comes down to this. Because how are you going to keep somebody from getting a license who has a marijuana conviction? So those are the things that we've fought for so far, and those are the things that and those are the things that the church really needs to be engaged in a really forensic way. And Pastor Taylor brought up a very, 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 very good point, that we absolutely must be very clear on our agenda and our ask when it comes down to political figures. We must know, we must educate. The last piece that I will put that I do think is very important is that we also need to be fighting big marijuana. As much as I was in favor of dismantling prohibition, but I in no way am a supporter of big marijuana. And big marijuana is no better than big tobacco or big alcohol. And they will absolutely take advantage of our communities. They will absolutely try to target us disproportionately. They will absolutely try to come up with ads that get to our children. So we need to be on the other side of the table as well, making sure that through advertising and all these other pieces, we are not taking advantage of there either.
Okay, so redefining the relationship. One of the things that, Colorado was the first state along with Washington that legalized. And so now we're finding that the owner operators in our state, while they didn't include social equity back when they first brought it forward, what they did was what I call, they included social expansion, the opportunity for those who were in the industry to expand. And for 8 to 10 years, there had been no opportunity for social equity. So myself, you mentioned Wanda and some others, have raised the question that social equity applicants who have been denied access need to be refocused in terms of participating in the industry. the first focus was expungement, making sure that we recognize that those who had been adversely impacted need to have their records clean. Then there was an opportunity for businesses. And so one of the things that we did was try to bring the business community, Black business community, together with the cannabis owner operators. No legislation, just saying that if you're going to need these things, these are some Black businesses who can provide these things for you. And so what I'm seeing in other states is that based on state, based on municipality and jurisdiction, based on who's in charge politically, there's a process that either moves very quickly or a process that moves very slow. And so in redefining that relationship, especially in New Jersey, where 75% or 70% of all revenues will go to communities that have been impacted by drugs. And again, 30% will be going towards public safety. How do you, again, and I really want to get to this, redefine this relationship, because I think that if we can educate our people, as you said, we can provide the data which says where there are disparities in a number of areas: housing, education, public safety, economic development. Cannabis is just one of those that falls within that area. But all three of y'all have hit upon something when you say that there's a unique opportunity here. There's something that, because we have been, this industry, like the country, has been built on the backs of Black folks. The fact that we're talking about legacy, and what white folks say is that that's what they call Black market. But in many cases, the Black market is doing as well as the legal market. And so can we define this relationship in such a way that it can move us towards the 21st century with what we know about what we know, and then what we know about what our people need, and be able to then engage the cannabis industry with something relevant? Tracy and I have been talking about a report card for years, because it's not that we don't trust the industry, but what we know from model cities, what we know from affirmative action, what we know from diversity, inclusion, and disparity studies historically, is that even though those promises were made, those promises were never kept, many of them. And so to me, it's going to require something a little different. And I mentioned the report card because the report card allows us then to look at who's in your C-suite, who have you hired, who have you contributed to, what relationships you have with vendors, what relationships you have with media. Can each one of you take a minute and just talk about the redefinition of the relationship based on some of the things that each of you said, but also that I've just mentioned? Reverend Armstrong, you want to go?
Yeah, I was going to say, let me jump in there because my brother, Pastor Boyer, hit on something about big industry.
Multi-state operators.
Well, and it's not just that. It's anything that's big, right? I believe that America suffers from these industrial complexes. And whether it's military industrial complex, whether it's big pharma industrial complex, whether it's higher education industrial complex, anytime it becomes BIG in front of it, we're not talking about our brother, the rapper, right? We're talking about unregulated big business. Dr. King had a famous statement: I may not be able to legislate you to love me, but I can legislate you for killing me. Legislation becomes the friend of our efforts in this movement, because he who wins writes the history books, right? And so it's in a very similar way. He who's at the table writing the legislation can slide anything and everything in, or call for its deregulation. And even though we're at this early nascent stage of states making these decisions, I absolutely believe that any unregulated business is never going to be in the best interest of Black and brown people. And we got affirmative action because we pressed the ballot and we got the legislation. We aspects of integration was because of the movement to legislate. And if we are not at the legislative table, going back to the political situation, so it's not about even the voting, it's also about those who are representing us, those who we put into office. And so I just want to underscore this notion that the deregulation of an industry never works out in the favor of poor people, black people, people of color, um, because those who are at the fore, who are leading it, who are manipulating, will always gerrymander uh, things to their interest, and so my biggest aspect is how do we ensure that there is government involvement, legislating this process, and not letting it be like many other industries uh, where our capitalist instinct will not always end in the best interest of, again, poor people in America.
Reverend Taylor, you have a last point here on this particular question?
I would just say, just make sure that we have the partnership all the way up and all the way down, not depending on just certain ones to do it. But as Dr. Armstrong had said earlier when we first started, make sure we're at the table all the way through. Because whether or not it's Democrat or Republican, all of them have failed us one way or another. We have a whole lot of empty promises because we trust people to go in the rooms to fight for us, but we can't allow that anymore. We have to be in the room at the table to make sure that the people that say that they support us are really supporting us when the doors close. Because y'all know me. I still got the empty check for 160 years. I'm still trying to wait for somebody to fill it. This time, we can't afford to move on empty promises. We need to know what's coming our way, and on the way we're going to know that. We have to be in the room at the table, and everyone should be represented and heard. Because if not, billions of dollars will be made, and our community will come up on the short end of the stick. It's time out for that. So,
Brother Boyd, you want to take a last step before we go back to court?
Yes. Yeah. So to your question about redefinition, particularly, in our relationship with cannabis and whatnot, so it's redefinition is through understanding this as a reconstruction and a reparations moment and opportunity, right? So whether that is with government or whether that is with the industry. So industry coming in, like in New Jersey, there's the way the scoring is, they have to have a social impact plan, right? So what does that mean for churches and communities? That means you need to engage with these industries coming in and have them resource items that you may be trying to do ministry-wise, things that we can do, funding for education, after-school program, whatever it is. Get the resources from these entities, and as well get those resources from the various government entities. There's these constant hearings that we participate in, and we ask faith leaders to be a part of in regards to testifying where the revenue goes and what kind of programs that revenue should go to. So this is a moment where reconstruction can happen, and we should see it as a reconstruction moment. We have to ensure that it does not go the way that reconstruction did as a temporary thing, but that it is lasting and it has long-lasting impact. And it also is a reparations moment. We have to look at this as dollars and revenue that comes back to our communities to build equity first and foremost, not merely programs and band-aids. We need equity. We need to dissolve the racial wealth gap in our communities, of which New Jersey has the highest. So we need to build equity and make sure that these dollars are coming into equity solutions and repairing the harm that was done. And more than just repairing the harm, building, because it's not enough to just fix what you messed up. If you messed it up, you need to indeed make me more than whole. Because I done lost time too in the time that I had the marijuana conviction and all that. And I can speak from personal experience on that. I'm waiting for my check too. Not only the 260-year check, I'm even waiting for the 40-year check of having marijuana convictions back in the day.
It sounds like that in this particular piece, if I could sum it up, Courtney, before you went to the next question, it sounds like y'all have sort of said, you can apologize, but you still have to be accountable. You know, you can apologize, but you still have to be accountable. There's some things that you need to do to make things right. Courtney, you had some question?
Yes, I mean, Reverend Boyer, your comments are kind of leading right into this next question. And our organization likes to think about the legalization of cannabis as an opportunity for equity. And, you know, there are three major buckets that we see those opportunities in. One is restorative justice, the other is community reinvestment, and then economic opportunity. Um, and so that's what we consider the social equity ecosystem. A lot of states, including New Jersey, have created social equity programs where they're dedicated a fixed percentage of revenue from the legal sales of cannabis to be used to reinvest in these communities, create these economic opportunities for licenses and incubators and those sort of things. Uh, Specifically for communities that have been negatively impacted by the war on drugs. We talked a little bit about how faith leaders can be more involved in where these dollars end up, but outside of, you know, we know the work that you all are doing, but how can you encourage other faith leaders to get more involved in this process, and especially with the relationship that they have with the congregation? Because we talked earlier about how a lot of times programs have come into communities when folks have not really asked for those things. And so how can faith leaders continue to engage community members to then engage decision makers to make sure that those needs are really being met?
And maybe just to add on to her question, I mentioned before that folks have not been living up to their responsibility and accountability. So what I've been doing is working with the Denver municipal government to make sure that we look at 4 areas: 1, social equity; 2, community involvement; 3, contracting; and 4, that escapes me right now. But in each one of those areas, there's about 15 to 20 things that we're going to be asking owner operators to do from a social equity perspective to demonstrate their commitment. And I think that part of what I hear your question is that, you know, where does that money go? What are we going to do with it once it's being raised, once the tax revenue comes? What are y'all's thoughts in New Jersey? Because recently there was an email that just came out from, I think, not Charles Boyer, but Charles Barker from the CRC, that wanted to hold a statewide meeting to talk about how cannabis dollars, sales tax revenue, could be utilized in the state, not only going to the municipalities impacted by the war on drugs, but is it going into education? Is it going into public safety? Is it going to housing, economic development? And so could y'all, maybe starting with Pastor Taylor, can y'all really respond to Courtney's questions relative to where you think the revenue is going and could be utilized for? And y'all have touched upon it to a certain degree, but I think that we'd like to go a little deeper on it, if y'all wouldn't mind.
Okay. First of all, I heard a big word called accountability. It has to be accountability across the board, not just with politicians, but with the community and also with the faith-based community, because this is not just about receiving dollars and cents. And then if we get the dollars and cents, we don't direct the revenue where it should go. Case in point, in Trenton, no civic center, no places of entertainment. Trenton, New Jersey, or Trenton, depending on what side of the track you're on, don't even have a theater. And yet we complain about what the activities that draw our young people, but we're not proactive to make sure we have these investments with places for them to go and to learn and to educate and to experience new things. Because we know everybody's not going to be successful playing basketball and football. So we need to be able to make sure we have learning centers for youth to where they can broaden their mind and broaden their scope. And these are some of the things that I believe that we need to invest in short-term, long-term, to make sure that every generation has a part of this. not just while we're living, but when we're off the scene, the generations that come behind us. We can make sure that they have the science labs and various things that they need to be competitive in society. So fully equipped, the holistic approach, I think we need to invest in, and we know we need revenue to do these things. But let's make sure when the revenue comes, and we're talking about how we're at the capital city, how come we only have one high school? We should have two high schools. We have an influx during the time of the pandemic. We had an influx of almost 8,000 people to this city. So they need education, they need health care, they need housing, they need jobs. They need to not only just jobs, because when you just hire a person and you're working for somebody, they know what you're going to make 30 years from now. So we empower our people so they can go into business for themselves and then empower others. That's a long-term, powerful impact that we have on our community. And I'm strong on healthcare. Right now, we have Capital Health, um, the only healthcare system that's in the capital city. Right now, we need to make sure that these entities are responsible, to make sure that we get the care that we need, because for so long, even in the healthcare industry, our communities have lacked. So we need to make sure that this money is directed um, into all facets of our lives, because it's not just one thing. And when the world sneezes, they get a cold. When the African American community sneezes, we get pneumonia. And we already got pneumonia heading toward the pandemic.
Reverend Armstrong, your thoughts on how these dollars could be earmarked and used differently?
Well, let me both address that piece. Secondly, Courtney's piece around how we further engage our clergy brothers. You know, the African American clergyman and clergywoman has a history of partnering with at least two other industries in our community: funeral homes and bar owners. And if you go back into Trenton, Bo Robinson, Dr. Woodson, and a number of other leaders within our community formed, some might have even said, an unholy alliance. I would like to think of it as an alliance that sought to uplift our community. And so we need to steer away from the stereotype that somehow owner operators in the cannabis industry are unholy, evil, um, or antagonistic to the religious community. Um, until we know someone, right? Until we sit at the table with them and talk with them, then we don't know if we can partner with them. And I would declare that this is an opportunity for us to sit not only at the table, but we have to figure out how to collaborate with the owner operator in the Black church or the Black house of worship to say, how do we advance the um, field in this issue? Um, and it's not just because it's a fait accompli, not just because it's here. I think that which was used against us as now needs to be used to help advance us. And all of us have said that in different ways. I'll give you a very strong case in point. Reverend Dr. Michael Neighbors used to pastor the First Baptist Church in Princeton, then became the Trenton NAACP president. When he took a church in Evanston, Illinois, the Evanston branch of the NAACP secured a $10 million cannabis inspired appropriation by the city of Evanston to figure out how to then reinvest those dollars.
As part of their reparations. As part of their reparations.
Absolutely. So I'm saying to you that Michael Neighbors is an example of how we partner with our historical civil rights organizations. Pastor Boyer is an example of how we figure out how to bring the preachers to the table to influence the legislation. And then lastly, I'll say that, so just to be clear on Courtney's point, the Black clergy woman and Black clergy man needs to see this in their best interest for our community. And those of us who are in this or in the periphery of this need to keep being ambassadors to say, no, don't judge too quickly. Here are the merits of this conversation. Lastly, there are two industries that I would say we can invest in. Early educational equity programs such as Upward Bound, Talent Search, Freedom Schools by the Children's Defense Fund. These are all programs that will advance the educational opportunities for young people. And we know that education is the ticket out of poverty. So if we're not investing early in early education programming for our community, then we're not setting our children up for success, right? Former Trenton Mayor Doug Palmer said in his Trenton literacy movement that between birth and 3, children are taught to learn to read. After 5 on up, they read to learn. And so we have to figure out how to equip them with the skills they need early on in educational equity programs like Upward Bound. Another program that I'm a major proponent of is home visiting programs. The Maternal Infant Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. We call it McBee funding. And we need to figure out how to tie in cannabis resources and revenues in with McBee funding. What is McBee funding? It funds early educators to go into the homes of children who are being born so that we can give them what they need to ensure that they have the best start in their lives. So those home visiting programs are the programs, and the early educational equity programs are the programs that we need to use these cannabis dollars to invest in. Unfortunately, all of the McBee funding, and there's been billions of it, all of that funding is only reaching about 5 to 6%. If you listen to Prevent Child Abuse America, 5 to 6% of the children born in America. And so until we get to 30, 40%, particularly in the Black community, then we're under resourced when it comes to giving our children the best start in life. So those are 3 programs. TRIO programs, which are our Upward Bound programs, Freedom Schools, which are funded by the Children's Defense Fund, and home visiting programs, maternal, infant, early childhood home visiting programs, are these 3 examples of programs that cannabis money can be used to advance and further invest in for our community.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned Evanston, Illinois, because part of what has happened, and I don't tell this to a lot of folks, but my roommate at Princeton was a guy by the name of Jean Lionel Baptiste. Jean Baptiste became a city councilman in Evanston. So he was part of working with neighbors and some others to identify how they could use cannabis dollars as a legacy piece for reparations for first-time home buyers in that city. And so in other cities, they're looking at scholarships, monies. They're looking at other types of investment in businesses. Reverend Boyer, what is your thought then on how this money could be utilized, or how the revenue could be utilized in such a way to benefit African-American communities? Because as has been said, in New Jersey, 70% of all dollars from the revenue will be going to municipalities impacted by the war on drugs. Each one of those municipalities has a school system, has government, has some type of multiple Black institutions in that area that has a need. From your salvation and social justice perspective and what you've seen and what you know about what you know relative to what the state is doing, what are your thoughts on how this money could be utilized in their respective municipalities?
Yeah, so we've been hearing from folks across the state and testifying vigorously on this in those hearings that you mentioned. The Charles and the Cannabis Commission have put out several different pieces. I'm grateful to the Marijuana Matters team sharing our policy agenda, which lists these pieces out very clearly under our Build Back Black campaign. And one thing above all else in my mind, and this goes back to your earlier question as well about redefining, as faith leaders, as Black faith leaders, we need to develop Black-led institutions in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
We need to deliver the services in our communities. The whole reason we have such a horrible outcome in almost every place is because embedded racism operates in every single white-led institution. Therefore, we must create our own. That's number one. So whatever we do, we need to think about those dollars coming directly into Black hands is something that we really need to prioritize. Also, as faith leaders, a lot of us have buildings that are underutilized or building projects that we're trying to get off the ground, things that are particularly in service to the community, whether those be community centers. A lot of us have parsonages and things that need revamping. Imagine putting those things in service to the community and accessing cannabis funds to repurpose those facilities. That's some of what we're trying to do in New Jersey, some of what we're even working on at Greater Mount Zion. So we're advocating that dollars be available for Black churches to implement some of these things. It's critically important that we're looking at investments in our various community programs, so whether that be violence interrupters, developing alternative first responder models. So instead of police responding to anything, any situation dealing with drugs or whatever substances, the police don't even need to touch anything that is not a high stakes, potentially mega violent situation. So until the day that we develop our own systems and these alternatives to the policing structure, which we currently have, we'll always catch the hell that we're currently catching. And so we need to invest in alternative first responses. We also need to develop in workforce development programs. So understanding in places like maternal health, we have such horrible outcomes because we outsource our birthing to mostly Black women. To mostly white women. And so Black women used to be the major midwives in the country until birthing was commercialized and stripped away from Black hands. And now that we have a maternal health crisis, we're wondering why. Well, because we're dependent on people who have historically hated us to help us give birth to our babies. So until we bring Black birthing back into our hands, we will continue to have these same outcomes. So we're also advocating that these dollars come to things like Black women-led birthing centers. This is something particularly where the church can be very helpful with, and even having programs that do education, birthing classes, all these things. Think about those things happening from our churches. Also, general income pilots for pregnant Black mothers. Some of you would know about the general income pieces, these pilots that have happened across the country to give folks some additional income, that working families, but that are really the working poor. Think about these dollars coming back and helping to supplement those incomes, particularly with Black mothers. And so those are some of the pieces. But again, I go back to also the point about equity, home ownership, things of that nature, and think about the power of developing a community impact fund. The power of recurring and interest building on interest over time. Think about setting aside dollars into an endowment for any given community that builds over time, and these millions and millions and millions of dollars are being poured in there. And think about what that looks like for our communities 50 years from now, and what kind of impact that could go into reducing and almost eliminating the wealth gap if we are very intentional in the ways that we work with those funds and think about long-term getting generations after us out of poverty and up from under the noose and the hand of white folks.
Well, it sounds like Nelly. It's hot in here. And, there's some folks who have a few questions. Courtney, you want to take the questions that have come in from the chat?
Yeah. Let's see. I did want to kind of piggybacking off of that part.
Why don't you do that first and then ask the question?
Okay. Yeah. Someone just wanted to make sure that we touched on the returning citizens community. I know we talked a little bit about it earlier, but if anyone has something quickly that's specific about how we could reinvest these dollars to support the returning citizens community, would love for you to chime in on that.
You mean the reentry?
Reentry, returning, yep, whatever.
Before you guys touch that, Trace, anything you want to say about the reentry piece real quick?
Yeah, Rev. Thanks, JB. Yeah, that's Reverend Boyer laid it out. When we talk about reinvesting these dollars back into the community, we can just talk directly what we're doing over at Salvation Social Justice with the Trenton Restorative Street Team, using those dollars to have directly impacted individuals, former gang members, former shot callers, and paying them to actually go back into the community to be public safety workers, to go back in to stop violence, to go back in to be interrupters when we talk about violence in our community. So those are the ways that we can reinvest those dollars. And Public Enemy said it best. When they talked about fear of a black planet, when we talk about black-led organizations, there's a fear of black-led organizations, not just here in the state of New Jersey, not just here in Trenton, but around the country. And until we begin to use those dollars, as Reverend Boyer said, to be handed off directly to us and not be a pass-through for any other organizations, then we'll begin to see some real success in our community. So, yes, having those dollars go back is exactly what we're trying to do, affect change with folks that are coming home from prison and having opportunities available for them also.
Okay. And I think that, Cody, that addresses, but one of the pastors, do y'all want to deal with the reentry question at all? Reverend Armstrong, Reverend Taylor, Reverend Boyer?
I mean, I'll just say housing is a major, major barrier for people returning home. And so some of the things that we're working out in Salvation and Social Justice, for instance, is acquiring housing. Some of the housing Pastor Taylor brought up, all this boarded up housing, acquiring some of that housing, developing it, and then having a place for folks to be able to stay, and then move them from renters into homeowners, and using the kind of resources available to cover the rent in the meantime. And then if we can employ them in places like the street team or other places and give them the supports to become economically viable and responsible, and then allow them to become homeowners. Think about the power of revenue, of cannabis revenue working in those types of spaces. And that's how we really make this kind of a reconstruction, reparations kind of effort.
And we're talking about too, Reverend Boyer, Reverend Armstrong, and Tracy, you've been here a long time. We're not talking strange language. This is what we had here. We had Black Wall Street here in Trenton. Black-owned businesses that reinvested back into the Black community. When you lose 80% of your revenue from your community and you don't leave your community, something's wrong with that. You think about Trenton right now. The dollars that we spend in our community are not going to businesses owned by African Americans. So you don't even leave your community, and 80% of your income leaves your community. We can never achieve what we need to achieve as long as we're being consumers. And now we are consumers in our own community because everybody else owned the businesses in our communities. At one time, we owned all of the revenue businesses in our community, so the revenue circulated around the community before it left the community. And now we don't even leave, but the revenue leaves. So we have to take a long, long look at this. And I think we're on the right track. We got a good opportunity to make sure we do this. And when these sisters and brothers come home, because that's another component that we don't talk about, we focus on the brothers coming home. But what about those sisters that are coming home? They have special needs. They need special housing. They have children and various things like that. So when they come home, the system has failed them. They're supposed to make sure when they come out that they are taken care of, that they have an opportunity to move forward. That we spend over $100 and some thousand per inmate. So when they come out, they should come out with an education, a GED, or something, and a job and health care. They dump them most of the time from all over New Jersey, right in Trenton. And then when that little check runs out, they have nothing to empower themselves with, and we don't have anything to give them. So we got an opportunity right now to make sure that when these sisters and brothers come home, we can give them housing, give them a job, educate them, and empower them, giving them a hand up, not a handout. So we got a long way to go. I think we're on the right course. We got a good opportunity here to take advantage of it. Let's continue to get the job done. And I know I'm talking to the choir right now,
Yeah,
because
you are.
all of us are trying to get it done. Yeah.
Reverend Armstrong, you got anything you wanted to say about the reentry real quick?
I do. And John, Pastor Taylor said it well, right? That we tend to be focused on the young men who are incarcerated and returning, and yet the World Health Organization has let us know when they have given micro loans to women in developing countries that goes a long way of stabilizing families. And so when we think about the returning women, the women who are returning, as much as I'm a proponent of male um, centered families and strengthening the male presence in our families, fatherhood programs, I also know what works. What works is when you empower women in economically under-resourced communities. Their creativity finds ways to benefit not just them, but those around them.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Is there another question up there?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something that we haven't really talked about yet. Someone asked about in-kind donation. If an individual is a part of a small business and they want to, this is for the cannabis industry, they're becoming a part of the cannabis industry, they don't have any income to invest, but want to support Black and Brown communities, what are some suggestions for ways that they could donate in kind to show their support before they start to generate any revenue? And this could also be like a scenario of allies, so like a non-Black or brown person that is looking to support the community.
Well, if there's
Well,
y'all want to take that? I
let,
mean, I'd be happy to
yeah,
respond.
let me just say, I think there are folk who have soft skills and that could always lend those soft skills development to those who are in need of those. And so you can be the mentor, you can be the instructor, you can be the teacher when it comes to in-kind donations, talent and time, not just treasure.
Any of the other gentlemen wanted to respond? Reverend Taylor, Reverend Boyer?
Well, they have revenue that they want to invest in the Black community or in the community at large. They don't have to wait till we get started with cannabis. They can help Reverend Boyer. We're trying to get this maternity health care up and going. Tracy has a business, multi-million-dollar business over there. He's trying to employ, get more people employed. They can make a tangible donation there. Dr. Armstrong is trying to get that youth center up and running, so they don't have to wait. Just write the check so we can build a youth center. Thank you. And I won't even mention friendship in other churches that are feeding people, clothing people, educating people, giving scholarships. This is what the Black church has been doing for centuries: educating, clothing, empower, and feeding. So you can ride by any faith-based institution, any Black church, and make a donation, because we are feeding people, clothing people, educating people every single day, including during COVID. So this is not something we just started. We've been doing this for a long time in the faith community and in our community as a whole. I'm 65 years old, and if it wasn't for a midwife, I wouldn't be talking to you today. So we know how to take care of our children. We know how to nurture them and all of that stuff. There's this false stuff out here that we don't know how to properly have proper nourishment and all that. Invest in the people that you have put your foot on our neck for too long. Get your damn foot off my neck so I can move. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But we have these windows and things, and we act like this is something that just happened. I mean, our community has been suppressed for a long time. And so we are trying to re-empower our community. But you don't have to wait for a certain time. This is the time.
Well,
Any way you want to help, we thank
I
you.
think, Reverend Taylor, all three of y'all have hit a very important point. And my good friend and one of my boys, Leo, sent a question in on the chat about the Business Action Center. And so for those who are not aware, it is not only dealing with cannabis, it's dealing with a number of small and middle-sized businesses and nonprofits in the state of New Jersey. But he mentioned a piece on ancillary business. There's a young brother out here, Ernest Tony, that's dealing with BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And what he's dealing with is the ancillary piece, which means that everybody's not going to touch the plant. Everybody does not want to be in a dispensary. But there are other folks out here who are doing security, who are doing printing, who are doing any number of ancillary Black business types that could be supported and could support the industry by trying to figure out where the engagement and the opportunity to talk to each other, because all of y'all talked about the education piece throughout. Courtney, you got additional questions you wanted to raise or additional points?
I think there was just one question that I know that we want to be respectful of everyone's time. There was a question that could kind of be a nice way for us to end if we're ready for that. But if not, I'll wait.
No, come on. You pose a question and we'll deal with it.
Okay. Someone asked, well, they were talking about just the brevity of that, what we've been discussing, how our folks have been oppressed, how the prohibition of cannabis has impacted our lives. And for practitioners in this cannabis space, they were wanting the faith leaders to provide some biblical references to spiritually prepare ourselves for warfare. And so I think it may be a nice way to kind of close out. We've talked a lot about things that are not going right, and that is something that we discuss a lot in this industry, but would love to end on an uplifting note and giving folks a little bit of hope and faith as we leave this conversation.
Okay. As we do that, then I want us to deal with 3 points. That the whole social equity journey, in my mind, reflects on 3 points. One is being able to look at past indiscretions, past abuses, systemic racism. Secondarily, being able to look at where there are opportunities to build capacity, where there are partnership relationships. And then thirdly, sustainability. This can't be just a one-up or because it's a hot topic or it's the buzzwords of the time. It has to be a sustainable piece that will go, as Pastor Taylor and Pastor Armstrong, beyond our existence into our children and our children's children. Pastor Taylor, there was a question, Pastor Boyd, there was a question that came up relative to the atrocities in the war on drugs. If you would take a minute, and then we'll have Pastor Taylor and Pastor Armstrong deal with the same piece. If you would take a minute and give us your thought as we close out and before we bring on Tracy to have the last words. Reverend Boyer.
Yeah, so as I think about kind of the spiritual warfare, and the drug war, I think many of the best prophets, and of course Jesus, chief among them, whether it be Jesus or Dr. King, really taught us how to fight the fight without becoming so bitter that hatred would ever eat us alive, and that we love folks even past their stuff. And so I often, in this space, given the drug war and everything else, absolutely, this is a war, and it is a spiritual war, and we need to call out the wickedness that exists unashamedly and unabashedly. But we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, right? In high places. So that's your government officials. That's your major industrial complex actors. And those are the things that we have to take into this. And lastly, I would say, what keeps me every single day and what I meditate on every single day is that I would have lost heart if I had not believed that I see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living.
Okay. Reverend Taylor?
I was muted. I'm sorry. So I think Reverend Bordy kind of hit right on that thing too, but also look at situation that we're into. One of the shortest verses in the Bible says Jesus wept. Also, I believe right now he's weeping over the suppression of the people, the systemic injustice that's taking place. As he saw the systemic injustice that was taking place under the Roman Empire over his particular people, and also for all people. So it's very important for us. I know we say, wait on the Lord and be of good courage. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Wait means ready yourself, put yourself in a position to receive and to move, or to be proactive. It don't mean wait and do nothing. It means wait means to be aggressive. Anticipate the ball being hiked. Once it's in your hand, do something with it. So here we are. We have to be proactive. We need to move forward. It's the perfect time for our communities to grow. It's the perfect time for the interfaith community to come together on the other side of COVID and make some permanent change, and to empower all people from the least to the greatest, from the greatest to the least. So if we can do that, that's a huge responsibility. But if we believe that God can do exceptional things, this is a great time. We are victorious people because we serve a victorious God.
Success runs in our race, Reverend Armstrong. Tell us what you think as you close here, relative to the last question that was posed on the war and atrocity and the role of the faith community. You're mute. You're on mute. You're still on mute. Is there anyone who can help him get off of mute? Reverend Armstrong, it's hard to hear you. You're on mute.
Simona said it might be the headphones.
All right. I think that we're going to have to go on because we can't hear Reverend Armstrong close up. Hello? Yeah, he said go ahead on. But Tracy, well, two things.
Now we can hear him now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. No, I was just saying, my brothers have said it well. Greater is the God that is within us than he that is within the world. So we've got to believe, number one, that God is on our side and that he's greater than all of the opposition that comes up against us. I also believe what we often teach our kids, right? I can do all things through Jesus Christ who gives us strength. Philippians 4:13. And one of my clear statements that I speak to anyone who's going through trauma, travail, tragedy, is that it isn't just the absence of something, but you have to do something. And so the scriptures tell us, put on the whole armor of God, shod your feet with the gospel of peace, put on the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the belt of truth, right? And so it isn't just what we take off, but it's also what we put on. And so this is where we have to train our children to put on the right mindset, put on the right attitude, put on the right mentality. Because if we don't believe in ourselves, if we think we're grasshoppers in our own sight, we'll never go into the promised land. And so that's what I love about Joshua. Be strong, Joshua. Be of good courage, right? You come from a legacy. You walked with Moses. Moses went to the mountaintop. And so you carry forth that legacy and you go forward and cross that river and go ahead and fulfill what God has called you to do. And so it is just the absence of something, right? We're fighting against. Let's continue to put on. And I think every owner, operator, every person that's envisioning something within this industry, put on that strength and that hope and that attitude that you can do it, right? Greater is that God within you than that enemy, that opposition, that force against you that's in the world. So God bless you all. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
So as we sort of wound this up, let me thank our listening audience. Let me thank Reverend Boyer, Reverend Taylor, Reverend Armstrong for being a panelist today. Let me thank my lovely co-host and moderator, Courtney Davis, the Executive Director of Marijuana Matters, for your graciousness and helping put all this together. And then to the Block to the Boardroom staff, Cherry and Tracy and Simona and Jamila and all of you, thank you so much. And so with that said, on behalf of the Black Cannabis Equity Initiative, Marijuana Matters, Cureleaf, and all of the other sponsors, we thank you. And I turn the mic back to the gentleman who brought us all in, Tracy Syfax.
Thanks a lot, JB. We appreciate that. And I know the hour is far spent, but I want to, well, first I want to thank Courtney and you, JB, for hosting this. Thank Reverend Armstrong, Reverend John Teller, my leader, Reverend Charles Boyer, for taking a time out their busy schedule to be here. You know, in celebration of Black History Month, I just want to end with this quote from Dr. King, because it talks about strength. It talks about courage that we have. And it says, a nation or civilization that continues to produce soft-minded men purchases his own death on their installment plan. We got to be strong, and we're a mighty people. God bless.
So having said that, all action, positive change, and healing. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. And in the words of the old Negro spiritual, y'all be good now, Talk to y'all soon.
All right.